Awesome. Hi, everybody. Welcome to our September meeting of the Pedestrian Transit Advisory Committee. Who's our acting secretary for tonight?
Hello, that would be me.
Oh, great. Thank you, Preston. Do you have everything you need?
Hopefully.
Great.
Hopefully.
Amazing. So we're going to start with introductions. Laura's going to just drop out. That's fine. Totally fine, Laura. We'll start with roll call of our committee members, and then we'll go to guests online. So starting with Ted Alexander.
Here.
Ginny Alverson. Don't see Ginny. Caroline Bodiger. Don't see Caroline. Meredith Brown.
Here.
Laura Evans.
Here.
Christopher Ferry.
Here.
Tim Gilman, who I don't see. Preston Gutelius.
Here.
Satoko Harai.
Here.
Brenda Marvin. Don't see Brenda.
She is in attendance. I'm not sure.
Oh,
She's joining. Yeah.
hi, Brenda. We'll count you. I see you.
Sorry, hi.
That's okay. And Steve, great timing. You are also here.
I am.
Great. Barbara Myers,
Here.
Bianca Norkunas, who I do not see. Vitor Pamplona,
Here.
Zach Rosenberg,
Here.
Alessandra Seider, myself,
No.
Rob Stanzel,
Here.
Carol Bugaris.
Here.
Great. And our ex officio, the esteemed city council at large, member Willem Bach, who's not here. Kate White, who's not here. Justin Schreiber.
Here.
Amazing. Okay, guests. I'm going to start with the guests in the room and then go to the guests online, starting with Lillian.
Hi, everyone. I'm Lillian Worth. I'm a new member of the mobility division, so I'm here supporting Justin with the meeting. Very excited to be here. I visited the bike committee a couple weeks ago, so it's nice to meet you guys as well. Yeah, that's about it, I guess. You can call me Lily, but Lillian is on all my official stuff, so either is fine.
Awesome. Thank you for being here and welcome.
Hey everyone, I'm Erin Mullins. I'm in the Master City Planning Program at Boston University, and we're a class we've taken to the planning meetings. So I got 3 of them to come.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. I think that's everybody in the room. So if you are online, when I say your name, Justin is going to ask you to unmute, and then you'll see a little pop-up on your screen that will allow you to unmute. When you do, you can say your name, your ward, and just a little bit about why you're here tonight. Or if you remain silent, then that is also fine, and we will just pass over. Starting with Era.
Hi, everyone. Ara Shore. I'm a Ward 6 resident, and I am a once in a while attendee, and I haven't popped in for a while, so I'm happy to be here. Thanks.
Nice to see you, Era. How about Fred?
I'm a Ward 4 resident, and I'm very interested in a lot of the, the multiple transportation, availability, bus, bike, as well as cars. So.
Awesome. Thank you for being here. We are also interested in those things. So you found a great home. I see Jake's AI note taker. So I'm going to call on Jake, but if you don't want to unmute, then that is also okay.
Yeah.
Okay, great. I'm going to move on to Joel, and then we should be done.
Hello, I'm Joel. I live in Winter Hill. I'm actually walking over there right now, but figured I'd listen in while I do.
Awesome. We will look forward to seeing you in just a second. Wonderful. So moving right along, does anybody have anything to say about the August minutes? Seeing nothing, I motion to approve the minutes. Do I have a second?
This is Meredith, second.
Thank you, Meredith. All in favor of approving the August minutes, please say aye.
All right.
Hi.
All opposed? Abstentions, great. Subcommittee updates. I have a feeling that none of our subcommittees met this week or this month. Am I wrong?
Nope.
Great. I will say that on education and engagement, we didn't meet this month, but we are planning a community walk on Western Pearl Street, which we'll talk more about in the present agenda item. So with that, I'm gonna share my screen. Which I have to announce before I do.
Alessandra can also announce that we're also planning a tabling event at the Summer Streets Monster Mash in October, which I think is slightly after our October PTAC meeting, but if you could look at that on your calendars and think about whether you're available to come volunteer, that'd be great.
Yes, thank you, Ted. Okay, great. Here's our agenda. We did that. We did that. Oh, no, here we are. Okay. So tonight we're going to talk, our first agenda item is to talk about an upcoming street reconstruction project. If you want details, you can go to this link, voice.somervillema.gov/Western Pearl. I am going to go through all of the publicly available information tonight, so you probably won't get that much more information by going to that website, but in the future you can, and you will find more information. So the goals for our discussion on Western Pearl tonight are to, like I said, review the publicly available project information, discuss our very early stage preferences for this project, with the knowledge that we will return to this project at a future meeting to dig in more to the designs. We want to decide our involvement in this project, including who's going to attend the public meeting on October 9th, to report back to the committee, decide on subcommittee involvement, which will probably have bearing on, well, won't have bearing on necessarily, but we will come back to that later in the meeting when we talk about our subcommittee restructuring, and then we also want to finalize a date for our community walk. So this is the project area. Western Pearl Street is between Medford Street in Gilman Square and McGrath Highway. It has a school on it. It's got some parks nearby. And it has Sarma, if you're familiar with the best restaurant in Somerville. So this is kind of what we're looking at. And then there are a number of neighborhood streets that intersect with Western Pearl. And just a reminder, Mobility reconstructed East Pearl Street a number of years ago, when we were involved in that process. So the goals of this project broadly are to make Western Pearl Street safer, more accessible, more sustainable, and more comfortable for everybody traveling. The major way that will happen is by reconstructing all sidewalks and repaving the street in the project area. This is part of the pavement and sidewalk management program that we all know and love. And that sidewalk reconstruction will include 20 feet into intersecting streets as well. The project also has the goal of including accessible curb ramps at all existing crosswalks, installing intersection safety improvements that could include raised crosswalks or intersections and curb extensions, or what continuous sidewalks is the term that Brendan Kearney used last night from West Walk Mass. And then also exploring opportunities to add new crossings across Western Pearl. There could also be locations for new trees, replacing tree stumps, considering tree bump outs, which is when the sidewalk continues around a tree for a more accessible pass through of the tree on a sidewalk, and then expanding tree wells to support tree longevity, which can be healthier for the roots. Installing protected bike facilities is also planned in this project. And then incorporating clear corners at each intersection. These are the white paint markings next to intersections. So they improve visibility for people driving as they turn or move through intersections. So they're less likely to collide with pedestrians and other people. There are one of the main reasons why we wanted to discuss this project as early as possible is because there are some pretty significant choices involved in the project. So in the bicycle network plan, which is a kind of comprehensive vision for a connected bike network in Somerville that was passed last year by the city council after years of work by Mobility, Western Pearl Street is designated for a two-way protected bike lane in that plan. And that is now legally backed up by the Safe Streets Ordinance, which passed earlier this year in June, which requires that when a street is being reconstructed like Western Pearl, if that street is included in the bicycle network plan, it has to include, the project has to include the improvements that were specified in the plan. There are provisions in the Safe Streets Ordinance for exceptions based on the physical features of a street or the usage of that street. which may become relevant for this project. Because the big kind of limiting factor is that Pearl Street is narrow enough that implementing a two-way protected bike lane would require a few things. One, it would require moving all existing parking on the street. Two, it would limit the ability to implement curb extensions by shortening crossing distances. It would also limit the ability to expand the sidewalk to provide more space for people walking and rolling, and then would also limit the ability to provide curb access for other activities like deliveries and pickup drop-off. So there are a few possibilities for the project. One is that, two-way protected bike facilities could be installed as is specified in the bike network plan. But there are also some alternatives. One would be to install a one-way protected bike lane on Western Pearl Street and then use a different neighborhood street that runs parallel to Western Pearl as kind of a two-way pair. Another possibility could be to turn Western Pearl Street into a one-way for motor vehicle traffic, which would then offer more space for other than car uses. So those are kind of like the high level trade-offs. And one more thing that I just want to add before I move on to the timeline. There is research, this might want to editorialize, but there is research to show that implementing protected bike facilities can also have safety benefits for pedestrians and non-cyclists or non-people who are biking. So, I think that's something that we can also consider in our consideration of this project. So just a little bit on the project timeline. We are almost at the point where mobility will be actively gathering community feedback on Western Pearl Street and future priorities for the community. Then this winter into next year, they'll draft a concept design based on that community feedback and data analysis like vehicle speeds and volumes and parking utilization. Next spring is Mobility's goal for publishing a concept design and conducting another round of community engagement that summer, concept design refinement, more community feedback in the fall, and then 2026 or 2027 would be the goal for construction based on a final design. So just a reminder about our next steps that we discussed like 5 minutes ago. I think that is all that I wanted to present on this project. So I'm going to move us maybe back to the project area. We have, I think, until 7:25 for this discussion. That feels too long. Hold on. 7:10, different number. So I'm curious if folks have thoughts on the project itself, on the trade-offs that I laid out, or just generally. And I'll start with Christopher, who has his hand raised.
Thank you. I'm just wondering if anybody has information about how this interacts with previous plans to redesign and rebuild Gilman Square. I know there had been some discussion of sort of that triangular park there where Marshall Street hits, really changing that around. There's a parking lot in there. There had been, I thought there were city-led designs to sort of change Gilman Square into more of a sort of a centralized park change. I was just kind of surprised that this was happening without a discussion of that. And then that also then wraps into connecting the Gilman Square T station with actual Gilman Square a little bit better as well. I don't know if we'd heard anything along those lines, or if that's outside of the scope of this.
I'm happy to answer that, Justin. So this isn't that project, but that is a project that's at 60% design. The city went through a process to figure out, could we add a third head house, but this project was more about getting an accessible connection up to the existing access points on Medford and School. School never worked, but there was a plan to make like a ramping pattern to get up Medford Street. And then as a part of that, there was a push to close the bridge and make it more of a community space. So this isn't that project, and that project is in the city's capital planning process, along with many other projects. This is not that project, but this project could have implications for that to move ahead. So one of the options that Alessandra talked about that we've got on the website is we could look at making it a one-way street, which gives you a little more space to do more, again, everything that we want. That would make it very challenging to then close the bridge, I think is, I hesitate to say anything definitive at this point, like we'll definitely look at it. But it would severely complicate, because Medford Street is sort of the obvious pair to act in the other direction. So that's a potential implication if we were to head in that direction, that option. I mean, I think but just to be clear, this is not the Gilman Square streetscape project.
Brenda, I see your hand, but just for equitability's sake, does anybody in person want to speak before I call on Brenda? Okay, Brenda, go ahead.
Yeah, I was wondering if it makes any difference if you put two-way traffic of the bike lanes on one side of the street, you know, so you have the bikes right next to each other going in opposite directions.
It does tend to save a little bit of space, not much, but a couple feet, and around here, a couple feet is all the difference. If folks will look back on the Gilman Square documents, which I think is still on Summer Voice, still posted, that was the proposal, was a two-way facility like on Medford that then went onto Pearl and connected to the neighborway through Skilton Street. Challenges are with bus stops, I guess, is one of the major challenges. If you have two-way on one side of the seat, you really need a floating bus stop. We'd have to look at, it would make it challenging to get an accessible bus stop at the same time as a two-way on one side, but certainly something to look at. And yes, it does save a little bit of space.
Isn't the 80 going away?
That's nice, yeah.
The 80 is modified in the bus network redesign that terminates at Davis. I think it's largely the same, but it comes down College Ave and ends at Davis.
Oh, but
it wouldn't
run
be
on Pearl, right? So
it
Yeah, I
wouldn't.
think
run
these
on
bus stops are all 80 bus stops, right?
Correct, yeah, and we, at this point, do not have information from the T. It's not in the first phase of change
Right.
that they proposed publicly. So at this point, it's still on their radar, but it is something to think about in the future. If we have sort of orphan bus stops, what to do with them, yeah.
On that, really quickly before I call on Fred, would it be a possibility to, I know that the T has like been somewhat responsive to our changes like on Tough Street, for example. So I'm just curious how, I don't know, likely you think it would be for them to change the route or add it to an earlier phase of the bus network redesign.
I think if you ask the T, they will want us to plan for the bus to be there for the time being. They'll want to sort of take the most conservative route, just plan for the bus to be there, and then, you know, think about how we might use that space otherwise.
Go ahead, Fred.
Yeah, I was just curious as to if there was a one-way bike transit. I'm not aware of any good way that would then complement that, and it seems like people are just gonna bike the wrong way if, you know, if there's no you know, good way to get from Gilman to McGrath.
Yeah. You mind scrolling back to the bike network plan?
Yeah.
Thanks, Fred. Definitely true that there's no perfect route. This is the priority network, but we also have a neighborhood on Gilman Street, which is just south of Pearl. It does connect to Pearl Street, so there's that issue to deal with. Medford Street itself could potentially be a pair. Again, it's uphill, so it's not ideal. And there's also the neighborhood through the neighborhoods, sort of up to the north. You know, one thing to note is that the Gilman Street neighborhood doesn't connect to McGrath, it goes under McGrath. Whereas Pearl actually connects to McGrath. But yeah, there's a lot of options to think through in terms of the routing and what makes the most sense, which direction, that sort of thing, if we were to go that way.
Yeah, Brad.
Any early feasibility thoughts about turning it into a one-way?
Too soon to say, yeah. We're still collecting the traffic data. Thankfully, the McGrath project has collected a lot of data for us. We'll be doing a red light running study at Walnut Street, looking at the crosswalk on Medford Street across Pearl. But it's still too soon, really, but we're gonna look to see what the impacts would be.
Can we get any?
Sorry, if you check out the Gilman Square website, there was a big analysis for closing the bridge. And they analyzed 2 different options, including closing the bridge and all the changes in the neighborhood we'd have to do, and sort of impacts that would be. That's probably something we would end up doing if we were to choose that direction. Maybe some preliminary analysis now, and then go that route. It's gonna be a much more detailed. Because there's been a lot of single time that has to change other locations, things like that. Adjustments.
Do we have any data available for the flow of cars? Like if we had to choose one way, which way would it be?
Yes, yeah, I'm not entirely sure we'll have those at the time of the meeting, but we are collecting like the tubes and intersection turning movements, so we'll have a good idea of volume in both directions. And we also have Medford Street from previous studies. There's a good amount of data that already exists for these areas.
Do we also give preliminary data on parking utilization?
I believe we have a little bit from the parking study that was in this neighborhood. We probably will end up doing a peak hour count. There aren't a ton of businesses, particularly towards the eastern side, so it's primarily like resident long-term sort of parking. I don't think anything's regulated short of putting it to resident parking. So I expect it's quite well utilized, but we'll probably do a general count just to check that. Maybe check out some of the side streets too.
I guess I'm just wondering, like, if the 2-way bike lanes were on one side of the street, then would it be like feasible to do kind of like a trade-off on the other side of the street, like one parked car and then like a bump out, one parked, you know?
We'd have to make the street one way, but yes, we could. I mean, that could
Okay.
totally be an option. And really, I think we were talking about like, if we do that, there's no room for parking. It's like the flex lane, right? It could be parking, it could be a bump out. Like it's pretty much the only space that isn't gonna be assigned for one thing or the other. 7 feet to work, it could be a floating bus stop. That sort of thing. So if we ended up doing like 2 directions for both cars and bikes, they couldn't even do like a floating bus stop or something like that. So to really have all options on the table, you probably do have to go with the one way.
Sorry, but just to confirm, if we are doing one way, then we can do one way, the 2 bike lanes and parking.
If you make the road one way for cars, there is enough room to do.
To the
two-way,
parking, yeah.
And parking. And
But then,
flex lane for-
but then we're gonna need to talk to the MBTA because there is no way to get the bus there in both ways.
We'll have to figure that out.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Yeah, that's the Leechmere bound AD.
Okay. I saw you opening your mouth.
Yeah, I was just wondering about the number of driveways on the street, because it seems like that would be a challenge for especially a 2-way bike lane. I'm picturing just how that would work, like crossing a driveway, coming out of a driveway.
Yeah, there are a large number of driveways, particularly on like the north side of the street. I mean, you can see those larger structures actually don't have driveways, but almost all of like the 2 or 3 family homes do.
Yeah.
So it probably would end up looking somewhat like the Summer Street bike lane. Maybe gets you halfway down and then get the rest of the way down. It's very tight, but it is possible. It's also possible to do like one on each side potentially as well.
Yeah.
But yeah, it would, you won't be able to get that continuous protection at driveways and also at bus stops too, just because of the holding amount of space.
Yeah, I mean, I would also say that maybe the fact that there are so many driveways might, put weigh on the scale of taking away the street parking, because there are a lot of people, live on that street and have cars and have driveways and. Don't know who's parking on the street, but it would be, I think I would certainly support taking away parking to achieve other goals.
I'm curious, thinking about, our discussion of turning Pearl into a one-way. Given that, Justin said that would mean that Medford Street probably could not be shut down to cars. I'm curious how people feel about kind of giving up that as a community space.
This is Ted again. I think we should probably try to, I mean, I don't know if the timing work out for this, but like, I would kind of like to see the options for both together before saying something, because it seems to me like it should be possible to make it one way and close the bridge. But, you know, I don't really know the factors that are going into that fully.
What section of Medford Street was supposed to be? So you
The
see,
bridge over the.
where it says Gilman Square on the screen? Yeah. Like that plan basically connected Medford to Pearl as like a continuous street.
And so it goes up from there
Right.
to.
And it wasn't like a bike facility, it was like a sort of just emergency, it's a lane basically, that emergency vehicles and bikes for people to use. And then there was this thought that particularly close to the high school, like park or something like a park, like a space for teenagers, that sort of thing.
Would that be all the way to like Walnut or to?
I mean, I don't think we really determined specific limits, but yeah, probably Walnut. And then some of that extra space using it for like the ramping, have like an actual accessible path to the station.
Go ahead, Barbara.
I wonder if some of the parking that is occurring on the street are teachers at the high school, since there is no parking lot at the high school. And it's, you know, close enough. I don't know, but we were asking, you know, who's parking there, and it seems possible.
Definitely possible. It's in the area where folks at City Hall and School Park.
Yeah.
Like the City Hall permits have a zone and it's in the zone for sure. We don't typically count for them that far away, but it's definitely possible.
I agree with Ted that I think it would be helpful to have, I mean, obviously we're nowhere near this point, but to have like a few different options that we could consider. I think, you know, Justin, as soon as you said like, well, that community space could be like a park for teenagers, I'm just thinking about like the really challenging situation that teens are in right now in the city, and thinking about like the challenges that the very building that we are in right now has been facing with teens in the city. And my personal like feeling on all of that is that like teens need many more spaces in the city to just like be themselves and explore and do teenager stuff. So I feel like losing that space, I mean, it wouldn't be lost right now, but like the promise of that, losing the promise of that space, I think would be difficult for me to accept just because it is so close to the high school, and I feel like that use is so sorely needed. Yeah, that's all. Are there any other thoughts on just kind of this preliminary introduction to Western Pearl and some of the trade-offs involved?
Yes, you probably already have this on your engagement plan, but I would really recommend reaching out to both like people at the high school and at the Edgerly Winter Hill situation, because I know a lot of families are traveling along this corridor via many modes of transportation, bikes, pedestrians, cars, so on.
Okay, great. Did you want to say something else?
The meeting is on October 9th, and I'll talk a lot about what we're talking about today with some more framing. Yeah.
Do we have any limitations on the emergency vehicles and so on? Like,
We're doing that outreach now, so,
Okay.
you know, I think we're approaching this very open, we're not exactly sure which way we're headed. And we're talking to the public at the same time that we will be talking to fire and DPW. We're just trying to figure out, you know, what can work for them.
because I imagine if they say that they need the two-way lane, we can't really challenge that much. Can
It would make it challenging,
Yeah.
and they've gone through this now on Central Street recently, so, yeah, I mean, I think they're open to listen, and we'll get their feedback on all these options.
Just want to rant a side note, the 80 bus, I was just looking at ridership numbers, and it's only about a third of what it was before pandemic, and it's taken a significant drop after the Green Line extension opening, so it looks like a lot of people switched over to that.
And that was the MBTA's main argument, is that it, not entirely, but parts of the route are duplicative with the GLX. I'll say, I do see a lot of people using the ADA to get to the GLX, like it's supposed to. Yeah, and it definitely has come back the way other bus routes are.
Okay, so just thinking about next steps. The hope is that we can talk more in detail about this project and come up with like a first set of recommendations from the committee, either at our October or our November meeting, which will be after the public meeting, so we can have kind of a more in-depth discussion. Is there someone or multiple people who are interested and able to attend the first public meeting on October 9th from 6 to 7:30 p.m.? Great. And Christopher, wonderful. Okay, so we will depend on both of you to go to that meeting and report back to our committee. Once more material, will more materials be available before the public meeting or no? Probably
Before
after.
the meeting, no, yeah, after, there'll be a little bit more.
Okay, so we'll try to include those materials with the agenda for whichever meeting we decide to discuss this in, so everybody can review. Subcommittee, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Who's the second person beyond Christopher?
Joel, our friend Joel.
Okay.
Subcommittee involvement, I think I'm gonna push that until we can have our discussion on restructuring. The community walk. We emailed you.
Yeah.
About that.
We finally got to group up on that. Our preference is October 21st and 23rd is the rain date. That is amenable to you all.
Let's see.
It's email for you every day.
That works for me. What do you think, Ted?
Yep.
Great. Does anybody have strong feelings against that date?
Sorry, what's the date?
October 21st, probably at
Monday.
6 o'clock. Okay, great. Let's go with that. Wonderful. That concludes our agenda item on that. Moving along. Next meeting in October, we are going to be visited by a representative from the Somerville Police Department. There are a few things and a few ways that we have engaged both directly with the SPD in the past, as well as on the topic of enforcement and street safety. So for especially the benefit of our new members who were not on the committee during those discussions, but also as a reminder to our longtime members, just before we speak with the SPD, just wanted to kind of remind everybody. And then the hope is that we can identify some committee questions and priorities that we want to bring up with the SPD next month. So for October, these 3 points are what we have already asked SPD to be prepared on for next month, but they are also very willing to speak on other things. So again, we're very happy to have other committee members throw in questions. But for October, we're already planning to discuss the latest application that the SPD made to the Municipal Road Safety Grant, which I'll talk more in detail about in just a second. We want to discuss how the SPD has incorporated community feedback into their work over the past few years. And then we want to discuss just broadly their future goals for traffic enforcement and whether and how that differs from their existing approaches. So just some background on our activity around enforcement over the past few years. Especially last year in 2023, we really dug into the role or the relationship between enforcement and street safety. We invited 4 sets of guests during the year. In May, we spoke with the parking department to talk about their regulations and how they respond to violations. They told us they really prefer warnings over tickets and that they tend to take an education approach over an enforcement approach. But they also recently made permanent the automated parking enforcement pilot in Davis Square that used to be outside. I mean, it still is outside the former Be Fresh, soon to be H Mart, Because, yeah, fingers crossed. Because they found a ton of violations in that spot. And just as a reminder, that camera takes a photo of the car, not of the people, and then before the ticket is issued, a human in the parking department reviews the ticket before it goes out. So that is all fine within Massachusetts state law. Then in June, we welcomed the Livable Streets Alliance to our meeting. They presented their 2022 report called Dismantling Law Enforcement's Role in Traffic Safety, a Roadmap for Massachusetts. And that included some data and evidence about the efficacy of enforcement and street safety. Stuff like pretextual traffic stops haven't been found to improve road safety. High visibility enforcement campaigns tend to not have a lasting impact on driver behavior. And automated enforcement, like cameras at select intersections, can reduce crashes where those cameras are installed. In June, also, we had mobility, as we always do, but they presented on their kind of evolving approach to traffic enforcement within their Vision Zero framework. And they released their Vision Zero action plan in 2020, which also created our committee. But since then, they have started to change their approach to enforcement, seeing a lack of evidence that enforcement effectively improves street safety. And they found it difficult to separate enforcement from systemic issues like discrimination and inequitable fines. So they like the parking department, tend to prefer education rather than punishment and enforcement, alongside, you know, the primary focus of changing the structure of our streets so that unsafe behavior is less likely to happen. And then in August, we spoke with the Somerville Police Department, and we're focusing on their approach to traffic enforcement with a specific bent towards pedestrians and people walking and people cycling. So they at that point had 88 staff members, and 3 of those were assigned to a traffic unit, which focused solely on they didn't focus solely on motor vehicle enforcement. They focused solely on traffic enforcement, a lot of which was around motor vehicle enforcement. They also recently released a data dashboard. So they presented data at the meeting, but there's updated data that you can find in the slides that I sent out a few days earlier. So between 2017 and 2023, the most frequent citation types were not having an inspection and speeding. And those were by far the most common citation types at 11,000 each. And then using electronic device while operating motor vehicle was in a distant third place at just under 3,000. And you can find all of the details on those meetings in our 2023 annual report. From those various conversations, we had a very diverse array of preferences on the committee. Some of us preferred stronger law enforcement towards dangerous driving behavior, like speeding and passing through crosswalks, or taking a right on red where it's not allowed. Some of us preferred kind of modified approaches to traffic enforcement that involve less direct interaction between law enforcement and civilians, stuff like automated ticketing, a lot of which is unfortunately still illegal under Massachusetts state law, and the bills are still in somewhere in the legislature. And then some of us still preferred self-enforcing roads based on design rather than police presence. So kind of one of the big concrete things that we have kind of been jostling around as a committee is the municipal road safety grant. This is a grant that SPD has been applying for, I don't even know how long, for a number of years at this point. But it is from the Massachusetts Executive Office of Public Safety and Security that just makes money available to state police departments to address local street safety issues. The application deadline is in July, and the awards get announced in October. And then November to the following September is when the actual implementation of the grant activities is carried out. In the past, SPD has used grants for overtime traffic enforcement, for pedestrian and bike enforcement, as well as education. So last year, this looked like pulling over people biking at select intersections and issuing warnings, and I think some citations, if I'm not mistaken, for using the Idaho stop or passing through the intersection on a red light or the pedestrian signal. They also used the grant for equipment, including speed radar signs and some safety gear like bike lights and helmets. City council has to decline or approve the funds. They declined them in February 2022, accepted it in 2023, and then very narrowly accepted it in 2024 after a lot of community dissatisfaction with the ways that people biking were being enforced against under the funds of the grant. So that's kind of all the background for our involvement with SPD and enforcement recently. Are there questions that anybody has or things that we want to make sure to talk to SPD about that are not already included in these kind of 3 bullet points? Carol, I see your hand raised. Carol, did you hear me? Carol, I'm going to come back to you whenever you want. Christopher, go ahead.
Just a point that's on here, and people can shout me down if they feel like I'm tilting at windmills. But I was not greatly satisfied with the police's response on size of patrol vehicles. I would very much like to see Somerville be willing to break from tradition with other towns. I understand that they're pooling resources to buy vehicles, but I would like to see smaller vehicles. I recently saw a video and then looked up the stats on the Explorer Interceptors, and they're in the top 10% of car sizes, which, you know, I think they had said is, you know, likely to kill people in other vehicles or pedestrians. And I don't feel that that's justified for Somerville streets. I do feel that's pedestrian, so.
Thanks, Christopher. That's helpful as a reminder from what we talked about last time we went with them. I can certainly ask about it again. Carol, go ahead.
Yeah, can you hear me okay now?
Yep.
Yeah, so this is thinking about, I'd be interested to understand better about, so for future rounds of the municipal road safety grant, like what can it be spent on? Because I can think of like a couple of interesting, I think, productive things would be, I feel like all police officers have the experience of driving cars and of like navigating the city as drivers. And I would, which maybe goes along with the idea of police officers driving smaller vehicles. If police officers could be encouraged or required to spend a lot of time driving around the city on bikes, and getting that experience with what that's like, and I think that would be a really great use of their time and funds. And also things like giving out warnings to cyclists is one thing, but I can even imagine something like using those funds to like distribute like lights and helmets and safety equipment. So instead of stopping people to give them a ticket, like stopping people who are like riding their bike without an adequate light to like hand out things like that. I can see that being also really important and also making important strides towards safety, but in a more cooperative way that would build goodwill. And so I'd be interested if those types of things would be allowed to be in, if those types of things would be allowed to be in that grant. Because, and especially the thing where more, I feel like if more police officers were cyclists, we might have better experiences in our interactions with them. So that would be something I'd love to bring.
Yeah, thank you, Carol. That's a really great thought. I do know that they, at least in this round of the grant, they did apply to buy bike lights and helmets. So that at least is definitely eligible for funding. I don't know about the bikes themselves. That's a really good question that we should look into. Just quickly before I call on Joel, on the helmet front, one of my thoughts for this grant is like a lot maybe not like a majority of people in Somerville who are on bikes are also experiencing homelessness, but a lot of people who are experiencing homelessness and have bikes, like do not have helmets because they're expensive. So I'm curious if there is some sort of way to like use this grant to buy helmets for unhoused people who also have bikes. I don't know, like if those people would appreciate having additional contact with the police in such a way, but that is one place where there could be a community need. Go ahead.
No, thanks. The Ward 4, the city meeting was yesterday, and I actually asked the chief about specifically if the police could spend more time on bikes in the community. And he kind of was like, oh no, we're kind of stretched thin as it is. We've got the, let's see what we can do. But it wasn't, so if you could ask about that, if he's here, that would be great. Yes, because like they all spend time driving around, but I don't know how many have actually ridden a bike recently.
Christopher, I see your hand, but seeing as you have already spoken, I want to see if anybody else wants to speak first. Yes, Ted.
Ted, just two things to say. I mean, just to pick up on that, I wonder if the grant could be used just to have police officers riding around on bikes. Just pay them to kind of patrol on bikes and see what how that feels and observe, whatever they do when they're just out patrolling, but doing it on bikes. Is something to ask. It seems like that might fit within the purpose of the grant. And then the other thing is just to, you've kind of framed this as like committee members had different thoughts about what the priority should be and enforcement or street design. I just wanted to put in a vote for kind of all of the above, because I think my opinion on that is like like mobility and the city should be doing street designs that, we all talk about that all the time, and obviously has a big impact. And we should have more enforcement. And the thing that kind of drove me crazy about the presentation last year was like the data about how many warnings they give out. It's like you're already pulling someone over, you've gone through you create all the danger and issues coming around a traffic stop, and then you just give a warning. Like it doesn't have a deterrent effect. Give a ticket, like get some money for the city and deter people. And also I think we should have automated enforcement, which like we need to push for at the state level. But so just a vote for kind of thinking about it. We need all of them.
Yes, thank you. That's a very good point. Tim, go ahead.
This is just a very small addition to what Ted was just saying, but I'm on the traffic citations dashboard, and I know that speeding and no inspection /sticker are by far the two biggest citations since 2017, but speeding has gone so far down in 2022 and 2023 compared to where it was before, like disproportionately, I feel like, compared to the other ones. There's generally fewer citations in general in 2022 and 2023, but especially for speeding, there were only 200 speeding citations written in 2022, which just seems like dramatically low compared to like the over 2,500 the year before. And, there could be a lot of reasons why that's happening, but I do agree with the idea of like, I understand the idea of like not wanting to have these instances where police are, interacting with different populations of Somerville, I guess, and having that be a testy thing. But if you're already pulling people over and just giving them a warning, it does feel like maybe there's some room for writing more citations for speeding, which is not something I ever thought I'd say before. But I'm just looking at the citations, it just seems like kind of crazy. And obviously anecdotally, I'm thinking most of us can probably think of instances where people are doing crazy stuff in their cars when you're walking around, and it's like, what's going on? Would this happen less often if there were more tickets being written? Maybe that was the case in 2017 too, when there were a lot more tickets being written for speeding. I'm not really sure. It's hard to gauge this sort of thing. It's hard to know whether or not warnings are effective or not. But yeah, I just feel like there might be maybe more of a middle ground to occupy here in regards to maybe writing more citations, although maybe this grant money doesn't necessarily go toward that, but it's just something I think should be addressed in some sort of way.
I'd also love more information about the sort of rationale behind the clear geographical sort of clumping on the speeding citations. It seems like there's basically 3 hotspots, and also a random hotspot on Inner Belt Road, which makes very little sense. But very little elsewhere. And I think there are definitely targeted areas where I think we can all probably each name several of sort of places where targeted enforcement could make potentially a big difference.
I'm gonna go to Christopher first, because,
One quick point about the
yes,
data.
yeah.
Because I think the citations data here includes warnings. So I think very few of these are actually actual money tickets. Not sure about that.
Maybe something just clarified.
It could maybe look at this better then.
Christopher, did you still want to say something?
Oh, it was just, again, when we were talking about the bike patrols, if anybody was willing to do some digging at the time the police were there, they sort of said that they didn't have enough people for bike patrols because they needed to have X number of patrols in patrol cars. And I just, I wonder if there is actual rules about the police needing to be in cars for those patrols. I know some of it was reaction time that they thought they could get to places faster in a car. I know, having a teen daughter, I contest that you can get around the city a lot faster in a bike, especially if they had an e-bike. They could also carry probably most of the equipment they need. But, just sort of, again, looking at that grant and saying, well, could we purchase an e-bike and see how much equipment we can put on it and see how fast a responder can get to different parts of the city, and maybe take one patrol car off the streets and have it be a dedicated bike patrol.
Barbara, go ahead.
As to the citations and warnings, are there ever any given for non-compliance with crosswalks? I mean, there seem to be no consequences whatsoever for that. And we're in a situation where I think drivers view crosswalks as optional stopping areas.
Is anybody looking at the data?
I mean, I don't know.
So there is something called
There are a few.
crosswalk violation,
Yeah.
which is pretty high.
Good.
I don't know if that's about parking or something else. Because will parking be the parking department's kind of purview?
Really not that many.
Yeah, there were more of those in 2023 than there were in any of the other years from 2017 on, but it seems to fluctuate a lot year to year.
Yeah, but it's also focused on Davis Square, East Somerville, and the inner belt.
Yeah,
I guess.
I feel like there might be a wrong address somewhere.
Yeah.
I'm
And Fells
guessing,
Way.
That one is probably the crosswalk across from Oliveras, which is a disaster.
Oh,
Like,
Oh, yeah.
that is a bad crosswalk.
Yeah.
Like, I've been nearly flattened there since. But it's.
Okay, we are nearing the end of this agenda item. Does anybody have burning questions that they want to make sure we ask SPD?
Maybe not burning, and I don't know, like, we're not gonna get a satisfactory answer, but I would love to talk to them again about crossing guards for schools.
Yeah.
Because there are still some gaps and inconsistencies, and especially in East Somerville where there's like 1,000 kids, or 1,000 kids coming in and out each day. There's just a lot that needs to happen. I know what the answer will be, but I'd love to just raise it anyway.
We're thinking about this.
Got one other thing. I'm
Yeah.
kind of curious if I've never heard of anyone ever being ticketed for a right on red when it's not allowed. It seems like any of the signs that are almost optional seem to be, I've never heard of any enforcement for no right on red. Seems ignored.
Is there any chance of just not allowing rights on red in Somerville, period?
You should look at one of our meeting minutes that we had last
feel like I've
year,
heard this
which
before,
I
yeah.
can't remember what month that was, but I can find it after the meeting and send it to you. Yes, Alex, I just got your email. I see you raise your hand.
Yes, hi, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Oh, apologies for the lack of camera there. I'm at the airport, but wanted to just bring up a timely question that we had on the Somerville Alliance for Safe Streets. I'm Alex Epstein, just for the record. And since we have SPD on the line, I thought it would be timely to ask,
Well, clarifying, we don't have SPD on the line. We are preparing to have them on the line next month.
Oh, that's next month. Okay.
Yes.
Sorry, I misunderstood from your newsletter, which I always find informative. But yeah, so it was about the automated stop sign enforcement. There's a company that has, it seems, developed a solution that is quite accurate, and they're able, in their business model, to partner with towns for now in New York State, I believe on Long Island, to implement that at no cost to the community. So we're interested to know and get feedback next month from SPD whether they would be amenable to doing that. And as I mentioned in the email to you and Zach, just there is precedent for something not unlike that, with the previous deputy chief being comfortable and indicating that there's administrative discretion to issue moving violations, not just parking violations, moving violations based on video evidence without a police officer having been there. And typically I'm happy to vouch for him, and maybe he could come back and brief the committee, but he was, he said most of those violations were typically paid, and they were honored. They were not ignored. So, and they were not challenged either. So just wanted to bring that up to you. Sorry for the announcements.
No, that's, so just to clarify, and thank you for bringing that up, would the chief still seemed, the deputy chief still seemed, I don't know, amenable to that, even though we have a challenge with state law with implementing moving violation?
I recall that the deputy chief, Stephen Carabino, in his view, the law was unclear. It was more silent than prohibitive, or perhaps ambiguous rather than explicitly prohibitive. And so in his view, as a police officer, he could still issue that. And he figured maybe that would go to court, but it never did, or it would get challenged. And it sounds like none of them ever got challenged. And this went on for many years. I supplied some of the video evidence. One time he mailed a summons to a driver who was unlicensed and got that person off the road. So.
Okay, super helpful. Thank you, Alex.
Just wanted to build that context. Unfortunately, he's not with the force anymore, but he, I think we should remember that precedent. I wanted to make sure you were aware, and if you see value in this type of approach, once you have a chance to look at that Streets Block article, it'd be great to get a pulse from the new chief.
Cool, thank you. Really
Thank you so much for the chance. All right, have a great rest of the meeting. I'll listen in.
Have a good flight.
Thank you.
All right, I think we have a lot of fodder for our meeting next month, so thank you all very much. I'm gonna move us along to our last, oh, not our last, oh dear. That's okay, that's okay, we're only 4 minutes behind. I would love to give us a chance to have officer nominations for our various positions. So these are not votes for officers, it's just folks who want to put themselves forward for an officer position. Right now we have chair, vice chair, and secretary. But we will also talk about another position that someone is interested in just a second. So I don't think we need to separate these out by positions necessarily, but is anybody interested in putting themselves forward for an officer position?
Yes, I am. Brenda.
What are you interested in,
for
Brenda?
secretary, sorry. For secretary.
Wonderful.
Oh, I'm Satoko for communications.
Amazing. Which would be a new officer position. Carol, I'm gonna put you on the spot. Would you like to also put yourself forward for secretary again, or do you want to cede this seat to Brenda?
I would be happy to have Brenda run unopposed for secretary, and appreciative of her willingness to do that.
Amazing. Anybody for vice chair or chair?
Does someone need to nominate you for chair?
No,
I would.
thank you, Ted. Great, we'll take that. Thanks. Well, then I'll nominate Vitor for vice chair.
Yeah, I think we're still running. We hope we can do the same type of work we have been doing for the past, what, 2 years?
Yeah.
And just keep the committee moving.
Awesome. Anyone else? Okay, beautiful. We are not going to vote again, but just keep those people in mind in case you change your mind until next month, or want to stage a coup. That's fine. Okay, more committee business. Our restructuring proposal. So, I think some of you have had a chance to look through these slides and see the proposal, but I will certainly lay it out with a little bit of a preamble. So thank you so much to everybody who filled out our survey on our subcommittee restructuring. We got a pretty good response rate with 72% of us. Our most popular subcommittee ideas were pedestrian experience, perhaps not surprising since we are a pedestrian committee. Followed by transit experience, also not surprising since we were also a transit committee. And then we had community events and volunteer recruitment with 6 votes and design review close behind with 5 votes. In terms of support for having some topics be devoted to an annual meeting instead of a full subcommittee, there was a lot of support for doing that with snow clearing. And then some support for doing that with parking management, enforcement liaising, and city council liaising. We had 4 people interested in leading subcommittees. I would be very happy to continue leading our community events group. It brings me so very much joy. Satoko did voice what's the word? Interest in also leading our community events and volunteer coordination subcommittee, but said that she would prefer the digital communications officer role instead. Vitor said that he'd be very happy to lead our design review committee, and then Zach put himself forward as interested in leading a subcommittee, but unspecified, and kind of clarified that only if another lead was needed for a subcommittee. So we had a little ad hoc working group between myself, Barbara, Brenda, Rob, Satoko, Vitor, and Zach. So thank you all very much for lending your time and your insights. I think 2 weeks ago. We went over the survey results and had a good discussion that is kind of summarized here. One, in terms of the experience-based subcommittees, we kind of came to the conclusion that it would be difficult to differentiate between like what the subcommittees were supposed to do versus just the full committee, because we are just a pedestrian and transit experience committee at the end of the day. So I think we kind of landed on preferring a focus on very clear activities and deliverables that were concrete and unambiguous. And then, really importantly, we just wanted to respect committee members' bandwidth, right? So not forcing there to be more subcommittees than those who were actually interested in leading subcommittees. And thought that we didn't need to, force more meetings than there really needed to be. So with that, we came up with the proposal for 2 subcommittees, one for community events that would be led by myself. The charge would be to plan our community walks and tabling opportunities as we have been doing, but also as capacity allows, explore new venues for community engagement, like our streetwise involvement that we have been starting to pursue with SAS and the bike committee. And then the second subcommittee would be design review led by Vitor, which would review mobility's designs for street reconstruction and quick build and other projects with a focus on pedestrian and transit experience. And then as needed, they would write feedback and support letters on projects. So this essentially would be our current subcommittee structure, but kind of clarified and without a policy and enforcement subcommittee, which I think can just be, or which our group thought could just be kind of wrapped into regular committee business. just some more things to kind of think about. I don't think these need to be formally part of the proposal, but just kind of was on our mind as we were working through the proposal. We would definitely want to continue having some annual meetings, one on snow removal in the winter, and then one on specifically the municipal road safety grant, but also just an enforcement check-in. And because the grant is due in July, that would probably make most sense in either May or June for us to give feedback. And then just some community norms to think about. Thank you, Ted, for reminding me that this is in our bylaws, but just a reminder that all members should aim to participate in at least one community event per year, regardless of whether you're on the community event subcommittee, if we decide to formalize that. And then also, subcommittee leads can change at any time based on interest and capacity. So, even though me and Vitor might start, with these subcommittees, if you are like, actually, I do have more capacity and I really want to lead a subcommittee, then that is totally fine. And also thanks to Ted for putting this in our bylaws. You worked a lot on our bylaws, like early in your time. Individual members should feel very free to pursue independent initiatives, and that is something that our group very much supports. And you can either report back to the full committee on those things or launch a new subcommittee pending committee approval. And then anybody who's leading a subcommittee should also have the option, this would be new, to attend our officer mobility meetings that happen monthly on the first Thursday to set the agenda for the next meeting and also discuss any other business. If we decide to adopt our proposal, that wouldn't really change things very much because me and Vitor would just continue to be at those meetings. But in the future, I think that would be a useful norm to have. And then just a note of formality, the vote that we take tonight on our subcommittee restructuring will also need to include an amendment to our bylaws because they currently specify our old subcommittee structure. That's it. Is there a discussion on our proposal? What do people think? Do they like it? Do you hate it?
I have a question. Can you hear me?
Yes.
So if I'm understanding, and something was happening with my sound, so I missed a little of the description, but if there are two subcommittees, my question is that there is a requirement that every member of the committee be a member of one subcommittee. And if we did that, then one of the either we would have exactly the same number of members on each subcommittee, or if it wasn't exactly the same number, then one of the subcommittees would be a quorum of the full committee. And I know that we're not like officially like an official committee that has all the public meeting laws rules, but would that create an issue at all? Or even if like there was the same number of members on each committee, so half of the committee was on each subcommittee, and if one person attended a subcommittee meeting that they're not that I'm aware that our subcommittee meetings currently are not like over attended, but the implication is just that we would have a subcommittee that potentially that the majority of all members would be on, and I'm curious if that's a problem, or if we would amend the bylaws in some way to account for that.
So I'll jump in with my quick thoughts and then turn to mobility for maybe some of the like open meeting stuff. But my thoughts on that are, if we're thinking about like dividing the committee into two subcommittees, like that technically does not infringe on quorum because it's 9 and 9. So that would be fine from like a formality perspective. But then I do think, Carol, like, to me, I think it'd be very rare to actually have a subcommittee meeting where, there are like the full subcommittee membership plus additional members. So I'm not particularly concerned about that, but I do wonder if there is value in removing the requirement that all committee members be on a subcommittee just based on like the bandwidth that I think that came through in the survey. Like, I personally don't feel like everybody needs to be on a subcommittee if it's just not working with your life, but you should have the option to, if you want to do more, or you have particular things that you're interested in. But I'm curious how other people think about that question. But we'll turn it to Justin for other open meeting things if you have other things to add first.
We're not technically bound by open meeting law, but we tried to hold to it. And if there are 10 folks in a room that's not publicly announced, then it would be a violation of community law. Again, we're not bound by it, so the committee can choose to do that. We've tried to stick to that if possible. But I think it's fair to say, I also think it'd be somewhat unlikely to have full attendance at a regular meeting. And you could think about how you would handle that in the moment if you want to keep with that.
I'm inclined to agree with what you said about, you know, I feel like there are other ways to be engaged and to demonstrate engagement other than subcommittee meetings. So I would support sort of an expansion, and I like the norm in here of like at least one community event per year, you know, maybe get involved in at least one sort of one-off initiative, like get involved with snow people. But I think there's a lot of different ways to get involved.
Yeah. Ron?
I was just gonna concur and say, I think the committee expanded this year. So it might have made more sense when it was smaller to have everyone on a subcommittee. And now maybe that makes, it's not simple. I agree with you.
But it's also important to say that these two committees that we decided and put forward in the proposal were the ones that we were certain that they will exist. Right, because there were two leads available for them. If there is somebody else that doesn't like either of them, that wants to do something different, this is the moment to step up and say, you want to lead something new, this is what I want to do, and we might create a new subcommittee around that. It could be temporary, it could be something fixed for the long term, but it's definitely, that window is definitely open. We're not bound to just these two options.
In that spirit, I mean, I think particularly with the idea that someone could get excited about some, you know, the idea of there being sort of special projects that someone could take on as interest arises, as events come up, the idea of having not everyone on a subcommittee, everyone is engaged in the community events, at least showing up to them once a year. So that creates some people that have a little more bandwidth to sort of explore ideas creatively, from outside the subcommittee structure. I like the idea of having these be the two subcommittees for now, have it open for some committee members to not be a member of any subcommittee, and those members might decide to start their own subcommittee later as they kind of think through it, or they could just be involved in sort of these other one-off ways. As Meredith mentioned, there's multiple ways to engage. I think that could work really well and kind of speaks to the diversity of, I'm sensitive to two of our officers are also the subcommittee leads. So there's a wide range, like Vitor and Alessandra, you're taking on a lot more than many of us are. But that might just be the reality of there's kind of everyone's here because we care about issues that affect pedestrians and transit riders in our community, but not everyone is really able to engage in the same ways. So I like the idea of these more topical subcommittees, removing the requirement that everyone be on a subcommittee and add some more, sort of replacing it with the idea that there's more of a requirement that people show up and engage in the community events. I think that works really well.
Cool. So Rob.
Go to the next slide. It refers to something I think you brought up in the previous meeting, or maybe it was 2 meetings ago. But as people very interested in pedestrian issues, a lot of us just in our daily travels have we observe hot button issues, you know, things I've heard some mentioned on the side. So this kind of ties in with the individual projects idea.
Yeah.
Which is, I know the focus of the committee in the past has been largely reactive. I hope that's not, you know,
very fair
misstating. I wonder if we could have, it doesn't have to necessarily be a subcommittee, but at least a more common way to provide feedback in direct kind of initiating to the city about things we observe. And, you know, I've spotted a couple of things that I really like, I'm really interested in.
Yeah.
So that could maybe be a subcommittee, which would be to kind of corral ideas that we ourselves see and kind of write them up and see what the city says about them. And how Justin can go, oh no, more work.
No, I like that idea.
I actually think that would be great for a subcommittee, if you want to lead it.
I am
Because-
interested in leading.
Because the consistency of having, say, a meeting every month where anyone could just show up to talk about the new issue they found and make that a letter to the city or something interesting that we could discuss, maybe do some research around it. I do think that will be extremely beneficial to us.
So, but I just have to hear that the city is, you know, willing to tolerate this and interested in engaging.
Yeah, I think, you know, our ask would be instead of just keep throwing things at us, like
Yes.
prioritize. That's helpful. And if it's something the committee think is a priority versus like individuals, I mean, we all have our access to grind on this, that or the other. But like if the committee is saying this is an issue, this is important, it's something we want to hear. And I think we've talked about this before, but like part of your role is your expertise and what you see around in the city, but it's also like reflecting the public and what you're hearing from other people, and the groups that you're in. So I think could be a way to sort of gather some of that.
I wonder, two thoughts on that. I'm really excited to hear that you're interested in kind of spearheading this committee, Rob, subcommittee. My first thought is, I wonder if we could just establish a norm, kind of to Justin's point of like, the subcommittee generates like the ideas and the topics and then like brings them to the full committee, like for a vote on like whether to write a letter to or advocate to the city in some way, just to establish like some sort of check process. And then my other thought is, I think that subcommittee could tie in really nicely with community events. Ted and Preston and I attended a event last night on how to conduct a walk audit. And we have been doing community walks on like in project areas that are already planned to have changes made to them. But I do think that there's a real opportunity to lead these more like walk audit-y situations, right? Where like we're walking along a street or a corridor that does not have a project planned on it yet, but we think it's a problem area and we generate potential thoughts and identify places where we would like the city to take action based on the areas that the subcommittee sees. I think that could be really, really useful. Any other thoughts on the subcommittee restructuring, on Rob's new, very exciting idea? Anything else?
I just wanted to ask Satoko it sounds like if you're interested in the new officer position, would you like to have a committee to help?
I was thinking it would be more like I would liaise with all of the committees, right? Because how else would we elevate the topics that are important to the team to highlight? So, yeah. So I was thinking I'm more that way.
Okay.
Awesome. Then hearing no additional discussion, I'm gonna go ahead and propose this structure, community events led by me and design review led by Vitor, with the addition of what do you want to call your subcommittee, Rob?
That's
Sorry.
That's a good question.
the new one.
How do we go about forming a committee and going through the procedure, putting all this together? I need help.
Great. How about
It's nothing else, it's just a name,
I
right? That we
know.
need.
Initiatives for now.
Initiatives.
Special projects.
That was my title of my last job, and I was like, it's video.
We call it special
Perfect.
projects. Okay, for now, pending a better idea that someone has, let's call it the special projects subcommittee, led by Rob, and then Satoko. Well, we won't put it under officer nomination yet, but the expectation would be that you would liaise with all the subcommittees. And then, that along with all of the norms. And then I'm also going to propose, because I've heard support for it, removing the requirement in our bylaws that everybody be on a subcommittee. So that is the package that I offer up for a vote. Do I have a second?
I have a question.
Yeah.
Will we still so everybody has the option to be on a subcommittee or not? So how formal will that be?
Well, I guess my thought was that we wouldn't necessarily maintain a roster of people. I think it would be more that the subcommittee lead would set an agenda every month, and then they would send it out to the full committee, like a few days in advance, and say, hey, guys, we're gonna talk about this at our next subcommittee meeting. Anybody who's interested, join.
I like that, but it feels more flexible to the sort of, enabling more flexibility.
Yeah.
Legislation.
Does anybody else have thoughts on that
Should we
question?
have a minimum size for the subcommittee? It's like, we could do the same, we need 3 people
But then we have a
in each
roster,
one of
and
them.
that's kind of different.
Yeah. But it's like, it's just to keep the consistency and keep the committee going, that we've, enough.
I guess the way that I'm thinking about it is like, if we have a subcommittee where no one is coming and except for the lead of the subcommittee, then maybe we don't need that subcommittee anymore. And we can use that as like a learning opportunity to like come back to the full committee and say, hey, I think we need to change something.
So I'm just wondering, because if we don't have that, every call for the subcommittee is an invitation. And maybe no one shows up. Like on the design review case, I'm gonna invite everybody, and then maybe 2 people show up, 3 people show up. If we have a minimum of people that have said they will participate on this for, for the year or so, then it becomes easier, because the invite is just expecting additional folks instead of, and we're gonna have the meeting no matter what. We're just gonna see if somebody else shows up as well.
Could we do like
It could be informal as well.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, could we have like a show of hands of like who would expect to join one of the subcommittees, like on a regular basis? Just like to set maybe a first expectation.
For each, or.
Sorry. Yes, for each. So, okay, starting with community events, who would be interested in joining that subcommittee on a regular basis? Me, Ted, Barbara, Preston. Great. Love that. Me and Ted have been doing it as a 2-person subcommittee, so that's wow, that's doubling our size.
That's awesome.
Okay, how about design review? 1, 2. Seems like a small subcommittee, guys.
Can I raise my hand a second time?
Yeah.
Okay. I like both.
Great. And then how about special projects?
I will join your special projects. I like special projects.
Great. Barbara, Meredith, Rob, Satoko. Amazing.
Oh, wow.
I love that. Wow, I love that our new subcommittee was the most popular. So I don't know, that feels to me like at least a reasonable baseline.
Yes. I think that this can work really well, because then it's a lot easier to manage. We can have meetings without having to debate if people are gonna show up or not.
Cool.
We should still track over time now, like.
Yeah.
Even having a roster doesn't, from past experience, guarantee that.
Exactly.
So a question on the meetings. Is it normally the same day every month that it occurs for the subcommittees? Because I think having that regularity, like, as a new member, it hasn't really been clear when they're occurring and how welcome or not certain, like, okay, can you just pop in? When is it? How available is it?
Yeah.
So I think if there's a tool where people can sign in or like say, by the way, I'm planning on attending, so we can be aware of, oh, we have more than, 9 people that want to attend this week, that we need to, all right, is anyone okay with not joining? Right.
Yeah. I wonder if we could do some sort of like Zoom registration. Do you have the Zoom registration ability in your account? No. Okay, we can figure.
We can do Doodle or some other.
Yeah. But yes, I would say that we have tried to have our subcommittee meetings on the same day, like Ted and I certainly do. But just with people's capacity, I think it has not happened that way recently. So I think the hope would be to kind of reinstate that expectation.
Alessandra, you put them on the PTAC Google Calendar, right?
Oh,
So
they're probably in there, yeah.
if you look ahead on there, I think it's a recurring one, right? Yeah.
It is definitely useful if it is a fixed time and date of the week. If it is the first Monday or third Monday, can change, but at least we know it's Monday. So the people that said they would come, they can clear their agendas.
Any more questions before I restate my vote? No, it's great. Okay, great. The vote that I said, does anybody want to second it?
I'll second.
Thanks, Ted. Okay, all in favor of this new subcommittee structure, please say aye.
Aye.
All opposed? Abstentions, great, yay, wow, good job, guys. Is there anybody here to give public comment?
I would love to give a public comment for a couple minutes if it's okay.
Yeah.
But also happy to wait if any other people would like to go first.
Floor is yours.
All right, well, thank you everyone for having me. I wanted to share that the city is doing its annual bike and pedestrian counts, and some of you may be aware of this program, but if you are not, it is basically our data collection effort where we have volunteers out at 42 different sites throughout the city to count bikes and pedestrians and people using assistive devices for mobility, passing through, and we have at this point 14 years of data. And it really helps us make decisions about how to prioritize certain things during street design. So if you are interested in participating, I'm happy to share more information. The counting period is over the next couple of weeks, although we sometimes extend it an extra week. If it's okay, I'd love to share that info to the mailing list. If that's not okay, I can certainly share it
That's great.
individually.
Please.
But basically, it'll happen over the next 2 weeks, and I do practice sessions for anybody who hasn't done this already. So I'm happy to work on that individually with folks, or if not, I have group sessions happening on Monday. So I will share that out to you guys. And yeah, for those who've already participated, thank you very much.
Thank you, Lily. Cool. I guess the last thing I'll say is that I think I'll send an email to maybe the full committee, because everybody should just have the information on like next steps for the subcommittee reorganization and, you know, how to get meetings on the books. And Rob, we can maybe talk offline about like, you know, getting your subcommittee started. Cool.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody. Oh, yes, Joel.
So the World Car Free Day is this Sunday. Boston's closing off some streets. Didn't hear anything about Somerville, but is that something is there anything going on or something planned for future World Car Free Days?
Nothing that I know of the city is doing. Office of Sustainability did actually send that to us just like yesterday, the day before, thinking, hey, does PTAC want to do something? It's probably a little too late this year. I mean, people can attend the forum from like their own participating content. But it could be something to think about for the next year. Yeah.
What do people usually do for those events?
And I heard there's like 10 miles of streets that are closed off to traffic in Boston. So
wow.
Yeah, that's what, so there's a Facebook post about it. So it can be true.
It's not parking day.
It's parking days tomorrow.
Parking days tomorrow.
Go sit in a parking spot with a chair or something instead and feed the meter instead. No, you can't park here. It's more than that, and there's more than that. That's the really simple.
People have made like parklets and stuff.
Yeah, it's usually,
Wow.
yeah, more fun than that.
All right. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you in October.
Everyone.
Night.